Today we're going to talk about the television production process. I lifted this photo off of the internet. It shows a beautiful set with a few cameras. They look like kind of small cameras, but I think you get the idea. In fact, let me point out a few things to you. We've got, oh, there I am. One camera here, and one camera here. What's on top of the camera here? This is called a teleprompter. In any good studio, you'll also have this clock. My clock is a little bit different. It comes off an iPhone. It's not quite as cool as this, but every studio would have a good clock. Also a program monitor. We're going to discuss what we mean by program here in the next couple of lectures, but this is a monitor that displays to the person what's actually going on. And in fact, I'm actually looking at a monitor just like this so that I can see what it is I'm actually pointing at. And then we have a set here. We talked about the set that I was using here in this studio. And then we'll also have lighting. These are soft lights that are here up in this area, and then a couple of hard lights, and then a couple of technicians who are working on those lights. We're going to discuss over the course of this semester what all of these things mean. And by the end of the semester, you're going to be an expert in the lingo. This class is, at least the theoretical portion of it, is really all about what I call the doctrine, the lingo of television production. And there's a lot of vocabulary that you'll need to learn, but just like anything that you're becoming an expert in, it's all about understanding the vocabulary so that you can communicate with other people who are working in the profession. And that's what we're going to talk about. Today we're going to discuss some of the basic terminology. And I want to get right into this basic television system. Any basic television system is going to include a camera. You're always going to have that camera. Here's an example of a camera. You can see the camera here. This is called a viewfinder. This is the battery pack. Here's a monitor that shows the camera operator what they're seeing on the camera. There's another little LCD screen just right down here. And then we also see this teleprompter, which we'll discuss. That's kind of difficult to see because the camera's facing away from it. But this is the view that you would get of a camera as a camera operator. You'll have a camera, that's the source of video in a basic television system, and then you'll also have a microphone, which is the source of audio in the television system. Now I want to go ahead and discuss some aspects of this vocabulary that we've already talked about. We've talked about video and we've talked about audio. Video is the visual representation of what you're seeing on television, what you are actually viewing. That's the video. The audio is what you're hearing. I've got a wonderful little microphone. If I tap it, yeah, I know that's horrible. Probably made the guys in the control room mad when I tapped it, but that's the source of audio. I'm looking into a camera, I'm talking into a microphone. That's the video and the audio. Now, in a basic television system, you're going to have the element of the video coming from the camera and the element of audio being fed into either a VTR or a transmitter. Here we go, more vocabulary. Dave, what's a VTR? VTR stands for videotape recorder. And I'll tell you what, you are going to see acronyms all the time in television production. VTR, it's not a VHS machine or a VCR or something like that. It's a VTR, a videotape recorder. What's interesting about it too is that even though we're not necessarily using videotape, you will still hear it called a VTR. I know it's kind of crazy, but that's the way the business works. A VTR is essentially just a recorder. Makes it so that it can be played back at a later time or edited in an editing system. A transmitter would be if the video and audio is being broadcast to a larger area. A transmitter is what actually does the broadcasting. When you're watching live news, you'll see what's being fed in the studio from the camera and what's being recorded via the microphone being broadcast to a wide area. Live news, live sports, those are things that utilize this transmitter. Now, just because we record something doesn't mean we can't later broadcast it via a transmitter, and that happens all the time in television production. But this basic system is going to have some sort of video device, some sort of audio device, and then it's going to either be recorded or it's going to be broadcast immediately, or it's going to be recorded and then broadcast later on. You can see down here now we have ENG or EFP. Ah, yes. I've said there are acronyms, and indeed there are many acronyms. ENG stands for electronic news gathering. And EFP stands for electronic field production. These are important ones. You'll hear them throughout the rest of the lecture, and we'll use them quite often as we continue in the semester. ENG is electronic news production. EFP is electronic field production. Electronic news gathering, electronic field production. Maybe they're in there, I hope so. If not, study those because you'll need to know those. Let's go ahead and look at a basic EFP system, or an electronic field production system, with no switcher. Now, you may not completely understand what a switcher is at this point, but we will talk about it in just a little bit. But this is an EFP system that does not include a switcher. You would have one or more cameras here, and then the cameras are going to be hooked up to each other. In the business, we call this being jam synced. And when I see they're hooked up together, the timing is hooked up. They have clocks that are associated with them. You'll connect them up with a cable, and the clocks will be synchronized so that when we go back to edit that particular footage that we found, that we have at a specific point in time on one camera being the exact same point in time on a different camera. We jam sync the two clocks together, and then we know that the timing on one camera is the same as the timing on the other, which allows us then to edit the program without any issues. Jam synced. Now note that when we could have more than 2 cameras. There may be 6 cameras, there may be 10 cameras, and they're all jam synced together. Now we will also have audio in one of these cameras, meaning that we have audio being recorded by one of the cameras. Not all of the cameras have to record audio, but one does. I have a microphone here. I can connect this to one camera. I can have one or more other cameras, and we could just use the same audio that's being recorded by the one camera as necessary. So anytime you have EFP, or electronic field production with no switcher, you'll have one or more cameras that are synced together in some way so that we know that the timing on one is the same as the timing on the others, and we'll be recording audio on at least one of those cameras. There's I don't know, you find stuff on the internet. You all know the internet, it's a crazy place. You'll find stuff. Why, jam sync the camera. This, I don't know, Orange, this is maybe annoying Orange before he became Orange. So you could see he's annoying, but anyway, I don't know what that means. Maybe you don't even know what annoying Orange is. Who knows? Now we're going to contrast that with the expanded EFP system. The simple EFP system, or the basic EFP system, would include one or more cameras, but none of them are hooked together. They're all independent from each other except for that timing that's hooked together. In other words, there's no means for us to get one video from one source and mix that with video from another source. I'm going to go ahead and ask the guys in the control room, Corey, go ahead and give me just a cross dissolve between this camera and stop it halfway through so that we can show that we can actually see both of these cameras that are on set at the exact same time. The reason why Corey in the control room is able to do this is because he has what's called a switcher. We're going to go ahead and talk about that. Let's go ahead and go back here to camera 2, Corey. Thank you. Take a look at this expanded EFP system. In the expanded EFP system, you're going to have more than one camera generally. It doesn't really make sense for us to have just one camera in this expanded EFP system because we're going to want to mix the outputs of these various cameras. Now think of this as being something like a football game or a newscast or this particular video that I'm working on. There's 3 cameras in the room right now, and I'm addressing any of those 3, and at any time, my technical director / director Corey can use this piece of equipment called a switcher to switch, it's got a clever name, switch between the camera inputs. He can go to this particular camera that has the graphics that allows me to actually step into the graphics and point at things, or he can go to one of the other 2 cameras where I'm actually able to address cameras right on the set. I'm actually able to look at you and not be in front of the graphics, if that makes sense. So, Corey has this switcher. He has the ability to switch between the cameras. This then feeds to a program monitor, and I have a picture here of a bunch of different monitors in a control room where all of the cool stuff happens. That's called a control room. Lots of lingo, I know it. Over here, this one right here, this monitor right here is the program monitor. The program monitor, if you want the definition, which I'm sure you do, the program monitor is what displays the video portion of what's actually going out to air, if it's being transmitted or broadcast, or what's going to videotape or to the recording if it's being recorded using a VTR or some other sort of recording device. So the program monitor shows what is actually happening at the current time. That's the video portion of things. You have camera, maybe 3 cameras here, camera 1, camera 2, camera 3, and then you also have other video sources, which could be oh, there's another one, another acronym. Dave, what does the acronym WX stand for? Well, it stands for weather. I'm giving you just a second to think about that. WX stands for weather. I know it's funky, but that's what it is. WX stands for weather. So you may have noticed that I could have weather graphics behind me, and I could be pointing out a warm front coming through and there's clouds all over Utah. Those would be coming from weather graphics. Now I happen to just have a computer that's displaying another source of graphics, and those graphics are this particular PowerPoint, which you would see on a projector if I was in a classroom. But I can still walk in front of them and point things out to you just the same. You can also have things from tower cameras. If you're watching the news, you'll see shots of St. George overall or shots of Salt Lake City that show different things going on. These other sources could be feeds coming in from other places, reporters that are out on the scene broadcasting live. There could be all kinds of things that are being fed into this one switcher, and then the person operating the switcher can push buttons on that switcher to choose which source is currently being shown. That's the video portion of things. The audio portion of things, you'll have a handful of microphones or audio that's coming out of other video sources. For example, if I have a recording that I want to play back for you, I'll play the video for you, and with that video will also be some audio. And that audio will also be part of these inputs or sources of audio. Now, those sources of audio are fed into what's called a mixer. Switchers switch video. Mixers mix audio. Switchers switch, mixers mix. Switchers are for video, mixers are for audio. I have a couple of pictures of a switcher or two and a mixer or two that I'll talk to you in just a second. But switchers handle the video, mixers handle the audio. The program monitor displays the video, the audio is fed from the mixer, the program monitor or switcher output shows the video, and then those things are recorded either to a VTR or broadcast through a transmitter. So you can see that the expanded EFP system has a lot more capabilities as far as inputs, and you'll find that with things like football games and other things like news, where you've got a lot going on. Now I want to spend just a little bit of time explaining something that is extremely important and something that a lot of people, at least from what I've seen, just don't understand. Stuff in television production, equipment in television production is very expensive. So you might say, hey, Dave, why not just use this expanded EFP system and use that for everything you want? Well, because cameras cost a lot of money, and switchers cost a lot of money, and mixers cost a lot of money, and so forth. So yeah, it would be nice to go out there with 25 cameras with an expanded EFP system and just shoot whatever we want and have a camera on everything, but every time you add a camera, it requires another camera operator, it requires more equipment, it requires a larger switcher to be able to handle all those inputs. In short, it requires a ton of money. So what are the pros and cons of the basic over the expanded EFP system? Basic EFP system is inexpensive compared to the expanded system. However, it's also simpler, it's more difficult in the editing process because you're not able to just select things live. But it's cheaper, and that's a lot of reasons why that type of system would be used over the expanded system. So let's go ahead and get to now ENG. What is ENG? Yeah, think about it. We just went over this. You're thinking back in your mind. I can feel it. I can feel it over the ether. What is that ENG? Electronic news gathering. I heard someone say it. Good job. ENG is electronic news gathering. And when we look at electronic news gathering, we're generally only going to see one camera in an ENG setup. Generally, you'll have a reporter either handling their own camera or going with a camera operator with only one camera and taking that one camera to record everything they want. Here's a very basic ENG setup. This just looks like a camera, doesn't it? Well, yeah, that's what it is. It's on this tripod. We'll talk about that in a couple of lectures from now, different ways of supporting the camera. This one happens to be on a tripod. But with a basic ENG setup, you're going to have that camera. On the front of the camera, and you can see it here, right there, this is called the lens. The lens is what takes light and focuses that light onto the front of the camera, onto the actual pickup device, the element that actually changes that light into an electronic signal. So the lens takes that and focuses that light right into the camera. So if we had light coming in from the outside, it would come in here through the lens. The lens would then focus it right into this area of the camera right about here, where that camera would then take that light and convert it into electronic signals. We would also have the body or the head. Now, I don't understand television sometimes. I don't get it all the time, but I have seen people call the actual camera itself, not the lens here, but the actual thing that actually does the recording. I've heard it called a body, and I've also heard it called a head. I don't get it. Here's my head, here's my body. They're two different things, but in television you'll hear them called the same thing. So you have a body or head. Anytime you hear or see these terms, they may be referring to the actual camera itself. Now, when I say may, you're going to go crazy. You're going to hurt me. I can tell. That's why I'm doing this by video, so that you can't hurt me. Because that body or head, the head especially, is used to call other things. Like this is also called a head. We'll get to that in just a second. But yeah, the terminology is kind of thrown around all over the place. That's why I want to make sure that you understand all the different terms. So the body or the head is the actual camera itself. The lens is on the front of that body or head, which focuses the light into the body or head and allows it to be converted into an electronic signal. Then you also have the eyepiece or the viewfinder. On this camera, this is an eyepiece up here. The eyepiece is what allows the camera operator to see what the camera is currently recording. Or there may be a viewfinder, which would be a larger screen that allows them just to look at it. Eyepiece is actually directed right on the eye. The viewfinder is a larger screen that they can stand behind and actually look at it. That's the eyepiece or the viewfinder. Then we have a CCU or a VTR. Yes, another acronym. CCU. CCU stands for Camera Control Unit. Camera Control Unit. If you have an ENG setup with a single camera, you may have a control unit or a camera control unit located somewhere else. The camera control unit allows operators to adjust elements of the camera independently of the camera head itself. They can adjust things like the exposure, the iris, the color balance, things like that. We'll talk about what all those things do in the next few lectures, but allow yourself to understand that a CCU is a separate piece of equipment that's connected to the camera that helps to control the visual aspects and elements of that camera. We have already talked about a VTR. By now you should know that means videotape recorder. And the camera may be hooked up to that videotape recorder. Then we, as in anything, we need some sort of electricity either coming from a battery or from an AC adapter, meaning that it's plugged into the wall. So you'll have these elements as far as the camera is concerned. The lens, the body or the head, the eyepiece or the viewfinder, the CCU or the VTR, or the battery or the AC adapter. So you'll have lens, you'll have the camera itself, some means of seeing what the camera is currently recording, some way of actually having it record, whether it's a CCU or a VTR, and some way of having power, either through a battery or through an AC adapter. Then, next on the list, on the basic ENG setup, is a tripod. We're going to discuss tripods quite extensively in the next lecture or two, but understand that a tripod is a means of holding the camera. There are a number of ways of holding the camera up, and I've listed a few of them here. Another one's called a pedestal, a crane, a jib, a dolly, a Steadicam, a hi-hat, sandbag, just a simple bag of sand, or you can simply hand hold the camera. Hand hold the camera. We should discuss this further, I think. You all, I'm sure, have had your dad or your mom or your grandfather or something like that record Christmas or some other holiday that your family may celebrate. And they say, yes, let me just grab the camera. I'm just going to hold it just like this. Hey, Billy. Oh, you got that. It looks good. Hey, Cynthia, where are you at? Oh, there's Cynthia. She got that gift right there. Is everything okay? Is dinner almost ready? The pot roast is on. Is everything good? Right. You get the point, right? Hand holding the camera is extremely difficult. Even me, a very muscular guy, I have a hard time keeping the camera still when I'm hand holding a camera. So you need to be extremely careful if you choose to hand hold a camera. And I will tell you, generally, you will not choose to hand hold a camera. You've got to have a really good reason to go hand held on a camera. Generally, you're going to use some of those other things that I listed. In fact, Corey, go ahead and bring those up. You're going to have the tripod, the pedestal, the crane, the jib, the dolly, the Steadicam, the hi-hat, sandbag, or yes, you could go handheld. Be extremely careful if you decide to go handheld. Otherwise, it's going to be like the family Christmas video that is not very professional looking. Now, having said that, there may be a good reason to go handheld. I don't want to say never go handheld, but if you do, you're going to need to have a very good reason. So, basic ENG setup, you've got the camera, you've got a way of supporting the camera or holding that camera. We're going to talk extensively about these things in a little bit later lecture. Then you'll also need to have some form of audio. You're going to maybe have a portable mixer, meaning that you've got one of those tiny little mixers that allows you to adjust things like volume. But you may also just feed the microphone right directly into the back of the camera. You're also certainly going to need to have a microphone. Now there's a few different types of microphones that I've listed here. You've got a stick microphone, which is just a regular microphone like you're used to seeing. Hey, how you doing? My name's Dave. That's a stick microphone. You've also have a lavalier. That's how you pronounce that, not lavalier. I've heard people try and pronounce it lavalier, but it's actually lavalier. A lavalier is the kind of microphone that I have here, a lapel mic, just a tiny microphone that is clipped to the person's shirt and then has another transmitter which I have in my pocket. That's called a lavalier. And then you will also have a shotgun microphone. A shotgun microphone, again, we're going to talk more about this as the semester rolls on, but it's a microphone that allows you to pick up audio from far away, allow you to pick up sound from far away. That's a shotgun microphone. And some audio components, like the mixer, if you've got one, or some types of microphones, which we'll discuss in a little bit later lecture, require batteries. And so you'll always want to make sure that you have extra batteries. Now this brings up something that I want to discuss with you. Batteries. I have heard so many times from professionals, not to mention students, well, I went out there and I went to shoot and I only had one little bar of battery power, and so I just shot whatever I could. And I say, okay, did you bring extra batteries? And they may say, well, I didn't know we had those. And I might say, did you make sure the camera was fully charged before you took it out? Well, I didn't know where to check, right? Those are the things you need to make sure you have. Batteries are cheap compared to studio time or compared to having a bunch of people working for you that you're trying to put onto video. Batteries are a few dollars. And it doesn't take long for you to determine whether a camera has a full battery, and if it doesn't, to plug it into the wall for a few hours to make sure that it does. You must not ever allow yourself to have a camera and not have batteries to power that camera, or have a microphone that requires batteries and not have batteries that will work in that microphone. It's just not an excuse, and in the professional world, you'll get laughed at, not to mention lose your job possibly because you don't have batteries. So batteries are one of those things that you want to always make sure that you have. So that is the basic ENG system. We've talked about now the basic EFP system, the advanced or more or less basic, I guess you could say, EFP system, and a basic ENG system. I want to talk just a little bit now about tape. In tape, you're going to see sometimes this word, although this word is being replaced quite a bit in today's world. The word is analog. It's not used much anymore. Many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with some of these analog tape formats. VHS is probably a familiar one to you. Beta, for those of you who grew up in the early 80s, in the consumer world at least, is still a popular one that, or was at that time a very popular format. And High 8, which many of you who may have grown up in the late 80s or early 90s may be familiar with that, High 8. These analog tape formats are rarely used, but I have heard people who are in the video industry still have a desire to use them for some reason or another. What you will see more often are the digital tape formats here, or the tapeless, which we'll talk about in just a second. The digital formats, now analog and digital, are another set of terms that I want you to understand. Analog means that it's recording with continuously varying levels. So if we have a certain amount of light in here, then that certain level of light is being represented in the camera with a certain level of electricity, we could say. So analog means that the level of light is the same as the level of electricity. As the level of light goes up, so does the level of electricity. They basically vary one with another, and you would be able to see that. One is an analog of the other. It's analogous to the other one. With digital, you actually have either high or low signals, either the light's on or the light's off. It may not be completely familiar to you, you may not completely understand. In this class, what I want you to understand is that digital is better than analog. Understand that, we'll get you through this class. In other classes here in the Department of Communication at Dixie State University, we will discuss more fully what the difference between analog and digital is, but for this basic introduction to television class, I want you to understand that digital is better. There are a few digital formats, D1 through D5, DV-Cam, DVC Pro, DVC Pro HD, or HDV. Those are some specific digital tape formats. They still use a tape like this, but they record the signals differently. With digital, they're recording either signal that's there or signal that's not there. With analog, it's continuously changing. Digital is better, yes. And then we'll also see some of these tapeless formats. And when I say tapeless format, what I mean is that the video signal is being recorded directly to a hard drive, and it does not use a tape whatsoever. In a tapeless format, it will always be a digital format. Here at Dixie State University, at least at the present time, we have digital tapeless recorders, at least in the department, and over at the CEC, the Community Education Channel, they have some that require digital videotape and others that are tapeless formats. And so you'll see both of those as you interact with the different cameras that we have available to us here in the department. All right, let's move on, and let's talk about these switchers. I've got this beautiful photograph of a beautiful switcher. Even just looking at it makes me drool with happiness that it's such a large switcher, because it allows a lot of flexibility in what can be produced. This is a really big switcher. I'll show you a really smaller one in just a second. This is the switcher. The person who operates the switcher is called the technical director. The technical director. We're going to talk about positions later on down the road, but the person who operates the switcher, who pushes the buttons to choose specific video inputs, is called a technical director. The technical director will sit at the switcher and make decisions as to which of these many, many buttons he or she will push. And by selecting certain buttons, the technical director can choose to show different outputs to the screen. Now, Corey is the current technical director on this particular video, and I'm going to totally spring something on Corey. I hope he's okay with this. Corey, I want you to go ahead and remove the graphics, and let's just show the green screen that's behind me. So Corey has now selected specific buttons on the switcher that have allowed you now to actually just see the green screen that I'm actually standing behind. So he set that up on the switcher, and now I can ask him to bring the graphics right back up, and he'll just bring those graphics right back up. He pushes specific buttons on the switcher to choose what is being shown on the screen. Now he's using a switcher that is not quite as cool as this one, but it's pretty darn cool, that's for sure. We will talk about the switcher, the actual one he's using, as we continue in the class here in Intro to TV Production. Now I want to show you a small switcher. This is a small switcher. In fact, this is a relatively simple switcher, but it does have a lot of power, even though it's relatively simple. This is actually a lot like the switcher I used when I worked at KCSG Television for the early years when they were first using live news. With a switcher, you're going to have rows of buttons. The rows of buttons, at this point I'm going to tell you they're called buses, but you don't have to worry about that just yet. But we have this particular bus, or row of buttons, which is called the program bus. You've heard that term before. I've used the word program, but I was referring to a program monitor. With a program bus, this is the actual buttons you can push to select what video input is going to air via the transmitter or to the recorder. Now, each column on here would represent a video input. So for example, on this switcher, we might have black on this one. Corey, go ahead and show them black if you don't mind. There's black. You can still hear me because the audio is coming from a separate source, but you can't see me anymore because Corey has pushed black on that first one. All right, go ahead and bring me back up. That's black. Let's say this is camera 1. Corey, go ahead and hit camera 1 for me. There's camera 1. Let's go ahead and hit camera 2. There's camera 2. And then back to camera 3. And this is camera 3 with the green wall, and then he's going to go ahead and bring the graphics up, and he has to do that with other buttons on the switcher, which we certainly are not going to talk about today because that's much more advanced. But you can see that he can choose different buttons, which will then allow different things to be shown on screen. There are other elements of the switcher, other buttons which we're not going to talk about today. That gives us the video portion. The audio portion, before I change this graphic, those of you who have been paying attention, what is that thing that allows us to choose specific things in audio? Yes, you got it. It's the mixer. This is an example of a really big mixer. Again, I just can't help but think how much money this particular mixer cost. Now, it may not cost that much anymore because stuff loses value just like a car, but yeah, this is an expensive one. So just like on the switcher, you're going to have different columns that represent different inputs. So this might be a microphone here, where this is the volume control for a microphone. This is another microphone. This is another one, another one, another one. You can have on this mixer quite a few different inputs. Probably I would say maybe 32. I haven't looked at it, but it looks like to me there might be 16 here and 16 over here for a total of 32. Then you'll have some master volume control levels here. Notice that these are red. Now, I'll give you guys a treat. If you can tell me what you think the main signal of audio would be called. If it's called program in video, what do you think it's called in audio, this master audio signal? Program. You got it. It's the same thing. You've got program video, which represents the actual video that's going out to air. You've got program audio, which is the program audio, what people will hear when that goes out to air. You've got different sources of audio here. You've got control over the master audio here, which would be the program audio. I will also tell you that I have heard it called the main mix, and in some mixers you'll have it labeled as main mix. What that means is program audio. So you've got now this very big mixer, which we will discuss in future lectures, and here's a smaller mixer here. Has the same idea though. We've got a column. This represents one input. This is another column, represents 2, 3, 4. This particular mixer has 4 inputs, 1, 2, 3, 4. This one has knobs for its volume control instead of sliders. You've got 4, and then you also have the program audio or the main mix control here, along with other controls and inputs throughout here. We're going to spend an entire day talking about these things. But there you have an example of a really small mixer. All right, another acronym. GX. What does this GX mean? GX stands for graphics. Now that one makes a little bit more sense compared to weather, because weather doesn't have any sound in it at all. At least graphics has at least a hint of an X sound in it, graphics, right? But GX stands for graphics. You'll also see one that I want you to write down that isn't on this particular lecture, but it's SX. S is in Sam. SX, and that stands for sports. So you have weather is WX, GX stands for graphics, and SX stands for sports. GX, let's go ahead and look at these different graphics. You have a reporter here on camera, must be Stephanie Brown, where is she at? She's the Lambeau Field, Green Bay, something like that. It's hard for me to read on this little screen. And then you have, looks like a CBS channel, looks like channel 56 and 58 maybe, 58 News. And then you have these little things up here. This one says live, and this one says something else. I can't read it from here. All of these elements here, including this stripe right here, those are graphics. Anything that's superimposed on top of the screen like this would be a graphic. It's a still image that's superimposed on top of the video image. Now I say superimposed, but it doesn't necessarily have to be superimposed. For example, right here. These are weather graphics. Now I don't want you to be confused and say, wait a second, Dave, you said weather was WX. Why are you calling it GX now? GX refers to the actual graphics. Weather, or WX, refers to the use of those in a weather report. So you have weather, and you can just picture me saying, yeah, Monday it's going to be 28 degrees. Don't you wish? I'll tell you what, when I recorded this, we're right in the middle of early August, and it's hot outside. So, okay, maybe 28's not any better, but it's hot, and it makes me feel like I would like an Arctic blast for about maybe a day, and then let's go back to the hotter weather. Here's another one. This is called CG. This particular set of graphics is generated by what's called a character generator, or a CG. Another acronym, add it to the list. CG is a character generator. Character generator would be these specific types of graphics, the ones that have these text-based elements that show up on top. So graphics would be a general term, meaning any of these still images that show up. A specific type of those graphics would be CGs, like these, that have Stephanie Brown's name on there and where she's at. So those are CGs. Then you also have this specific type of graphic, the weather graphics, which are the ones down here. And then you also have what would be called a still store. A still store would be a place where a variety of graphics are kept. And it would be, if you can imagine, like a videotape recorder for graphics. That would be the still store. We've talked about cameras, we've talked about audio, we've talked about graphics. I want to talk about another aspect of television production. This is replay or playback. Now, there are a lot of jobs in television production, tons of jobs, and some of them require a certain level of ability. And one of those is this replay or playback, especially replay. Replay operators in the industry can actually bring in large paychecks. And if you decide you want to become a replay operator, that might be a good way to go, because those people can get paid quite a bit of money when they go out on shoots. The reason why is because these replay machines are semi-difficult to operate. I told you about those switchers and those mixers. Those are also other elements of things that are difficult to operate, and those people will get paid quite a bit of money as well, relatively speaking. With replay or playback, you would be running a VTR, one or more VTRs. You would also be sometimes playing back and recording simultaneously. For example, this particular replay machine would be recording, looks like 3 cameras, 1, 2, 3 cameras down here. It would be recording those all the time, even while the replay operator is choosing to play back one of those 3 cameras. So maybe these screens are showing what's happening live, these are what's happening on the playback, and this is the current output of the replay machine. This over here would be a list of things that can be recalled at any time. So maybe this particular one is when the quarterback got sacked, and this is another one where the quarterback got sacked, and this is another one where there's a touchdown, and this is some cool play, cool play, cool play. They could all be double-clicked on and played back later. The replay operator can also build montages of cool replays. It requires somebody who's adept at not only controlling the machine, controlling the software, but also understanding what's important. And then also working with the person in charge, the producer, to ensure that they understand what's important at that particular time. A lot of times these playback machines are recorded on what's called a media server. A media server being a network computer that records video that can be served or played back to a variety of different devices. All of these elements are elements that are geared toward acquisition of video, the actual gathering of video, whether it be through sports or news or any other type of video type element. So it's all about the acquisition. We're going to move now and shift to, once we've already got the footage acquired, once we've gathered that video footage, what do we do with it to make it more meaningful, to make it easier for people to watch, to make it more exciting, and so forth? And we are going to then turn to editing. Editing is the taking of the acquired video footage and shifting it around, cutting it shorter, mixing it around into different areas, taking wider shots and then cutting to tighter shots, things like that. Editing is about taking that footage and assembling it into a finished program. I've listed a number of editing software programs that are out there. Final Cut Pro is one of them. Adobe Premiere is another editing software system. Avid makes a number of editing software programs. One thing they all have in common, though, they all do the same thing different. They all do the same thing different. This is something that you're going to hear me say a number of times. It's like Coke and Pepsi. You're going to hear me say that. It's like Coke and Pepsi. They all do the same thing different. You may be a Pepsi drinker. You may have a specific flavor of cola that suits your fancy, that fills you with joy. Another person might be a Coke drinker. I love Coca-Cola. Other people might say, you know, I don't like cola at all. I like Sprite. I like 7-Up. I like Orange, Miranda, whatever the heck you want. They all do the same thing different, right? In the case of soda pop and things like that, they taste a little bit different, and it all depends on the flavor that people enjoy. The same is true with these editing software programs. They all do the same thing different, and it really just depends on how you like to operate the software. Here at Dixie State University, at least at the current time, we have at our disposal Adobe Premiere as well as Final Cut Pro. And I must admit, I'm more familiar with Final Cut Pro, but I'm coming up to speed on Adobe Premiere. If you talk to other people, they'll have a specific preference. What you need to do is you'll need to find what your preference is. Also, you'll need to understand what you can afford. Software programs, just like any other type of software programs, in the case of editing programs, they are a little bit differently priced. The case of Final Cut Pro, it only runs on a Mac, and so you have to have a Mac, which I would recommend. Okay, I'm not going to push Apple products. I'm not going to do that. But they all do the same thing different. It depends on your price point. It depends on what you're into. So that's what we talk about when we talk about editing. That brings us now to the end of today's lecture. We've talked about how to acquire footage. We've talked about ENG setups. We've talked about EFP setups. We've talked just a little bit about switchers and mixers, and we're going to go into much more detail on those ideas, those elements, as the semester progresses. And we've talked a little bit about a couple of other jobs that are available in the industry, one of them being graphics, the other one being replay. There are a number of other positions that we're going to talk about over the course of the next few weeks and over the course of the next few videos as well. And then we finished today's lecture talking about editing, and I gave you just a little bit of an idea of what editing's all about and a handful of different software packages that are available to you when it comes to editing. I recommend that you understand these things and that you ask many, many questions. And that brings to mind something I want to drive home to you. Ask me questions. Just because I'm recording lectures on video doesn't mean I'm not just a text away, or an email away, or a Canvas message away. I implore you, if you do not understand anything that we're talking about today, what would you do if we were in a normal classroom? You would raise your hand. In this class, the way you raise your hand, at least when it comes to this theoretical portion, you type out those words, you send me a message in Canvas. I promise you I will get back to you, just like in a normal classroom. It just is a little bit more delayed. I can tell you, though, it's not delayed by much. Ask other students who have taken me for a professor. I enjoy getting back to people as quickly as possible. I thrive on that. So don't hesitate and think, well, good heck, if I put this stuff out there, he's gonna answer it like 3 days from now. No, I try and answer things as quickly as I possibly can. Understand though that I do sleep and I do have other things that I have going on. So it's not always going to be within 30 seconds, but I do try and answer things very quickly. So by all means, send me messages in Canvas or some of the other things we talked about in the syllabus. And if you have questions, let me know. We will talk about these things more thoroughly as we practice on some of these elements and some of these pieces of equipment. So it will be more clear as the semester goes on. This is just a little bit of an overview. So I invite you to watch the things that you want to go over again. And if you have any questions, let me know. And I look forward to seeing you in class or by a video on the next lecture.